So this is a garden of olive trees that they're going to be in, and just a different viewpoint in it in here. Now, here again is a situation that we come into, and that is, you noticed I've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John up here, because now all four Gospels teach these things. So if we're going to go into it in detail and try to get into everything, then we would have to go to all of them, and it would be a long, long study in doing this. So my approach is going to be that I'm going to study from the book of John. We're just going to take the way John deals with it. And he's going to give us an abbreviated story here of this, but he will leave out some things. Each gospel will leave out something, and then the other gospels will put it in. So as we go through, I may just pull it out of my head and throw it in as we go through, something that John doesn't say. But if I do, well, you'll know where we're getting it out of one of these others in here. So we go back and we can look then in that thing. Now, we learn in the other Gospels that first of all, before they left the upper room, that they first sung a hymn, and then they went out into the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, as they go out into the Garden of Gethsemane, we're going to see that here is the way that the story unfolds. That he's going to go over into the Garden of Gethsemane. He's going to stop with his disciples and ask them to stay there, and then he's going to take Peter, James, and John on up with him for just a little ways in there. As he goes up with them, he tells them something, and that is he told them that he was sorrowful unto death. That means he told them, I am so sorry that I could die. So this pain is hitting Jesus right now before he ever goes to the cross. He's in such terrible agony. So he tells Peter, James, and John to stop there and wait on him, and he went a little farther up, and he fell on his face then. Well, when he fell on his face, he prayed for 3 hours. Now he came back and he found his disciples asleep 3 times. He prayed an hour, then he came back and found them asleep, and then did that again 2 more times. Now, while Jesus is praying there in the garden, he says really one thing, one basic thing that we're told he prays. He said, Father, if it be possible for this cup to pass from me, please let it do so. But not my will, but thine be done. So he's committing it to God, asking God, if there's any way, then please don't make me go through this. Now, obviously, what he's talking about is if there is any way for God to accomplish the salvation of man without Jesus having to go through this death, then he prays that God would not put him through it. And of course, there was no way that salvation of man would go without Jesus having to die. So therefore, Jesus then is going to have to die. Now, he's visited by an angel at this time, and it says that he had his sweat coming out as though it were blood. Now, this has been documented medically about 100 times. They have about 100 cases of people that are in such great agony, such great pain, that their sweat, blood did come forth with the sweat. And in every case, I read, they said, it is when an individual believes he's getting ready to die, that he is looking and he's seeing death is right here, and he's going through this terrible, horrible agony of facing this death. Well, this is what Jesus is doing at this time. So the angel visits him and ministers to him and helps him in that situation. Now at this time, then the soldiers came. Now there was a cohort, and a cohort is 555 men. Now, maybe the whole cohort didn't come. I'm not saying all 555 came, but there was a large group of people that came from this cohort, and he identified himself. Jesus walks up to them and he said, "Whom are you seeking?" They said, "Jesus of Nazareth." He said, "I am he." At that time, they all fell backwards, which would be, the only way I can explain it, is a miraculous situation. But it did show that as he goes out and he faces this cohort, that he really is in control. When he says, I am he, they all fall down. They get back up, and he says, "Whom are you seeking?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." And he said, "I am he." Now, at this time he said, "Now, if you're seeking me, then let these others go." And they all left. When you read in the Gospel of Mark, as I'll have down here, I guess, I'm getting, I guess, just a little out of order right in here. I'll get back to Mark in just a minute. This is a time, they all fell back, and then Judas is standing there, and Judas has this sign that whoever it is that he walks up to and kisses, that is the man. So Jesus now is taking charge of this whole thing. They anticipated that Jesus wouldn't say, "Who are you seeking?" He wouldn't come out and give himself up. They needed a way to know which one he was. So Judas says, "I will identify him." But Jesus just turns everything upside down, and he said, "I am he," and said it twice. So Judas now, then Jesus looked over to Judas, and he said, "Judas, will you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" So here he asked Judas now this, and I can't imagine what went through Judas's mind at this particular time. Now, just earlier in the night, they were having the Lord's Supper. And you remember the Lord said, "One of you are going to betray me?" And they asked, "Who is it?" And he says, "It's the one that I take this, this sop, this piece of bread, and give it to." And he handed it to Judas. Judas knows that Jesus knows what he's going to do. And then Jesus looked at him and said, "Whatever you're going to do, do it quickly." He got up and left. He went over and told them about this. Now he comes up, and now Jesus once again said, "Will you betray me with a kiss?" I can't imagine what he thought, how he would go ahead with it at this particular time, but he did. He went ahead and walked up and kissed Jesus, and then they knew, okay, this really is the man. Now, later on, we're not going to study this tonight, but later on in chapter 27 of the book of Matthew, you find out that Judas, after he did this, and after he saw in the trials, he went back, and after he saw that they were intent on killing Jesus, that's when he went back, threw the money down, tried to give it back to them. They wouldn't take it, and then he went out and he hanged himself. And so Judas, I don't know how to put it, his heart was touched, his heart was broken. He was sorrowful enough that he went out and he hanged himself. But you look at this trauma that he went through that night. Then the next thing is that the mob came and grabbed Jesus. Peter pulled out the sword and cut off the man's right ear. And as you think about this, when you pull out a sword and it's in a crowd, you take this sword and you come down. When you come close enough to cut off a guy's right ear, you're getting into some pretty dangerous area, aren't you? See? So evidently Peter intended to kill that man. Jesus then told him, "Put up your sword," and then he reached down, got the ear, put it back on the guy, and he healed the man. Then his disciples fled. He told them, he said, "I'm the one you want, so let them go." Now, I put this down because it's kind of interesting that Mark tells you, he said there was a young man who fled naked. Now, in this uproar, evidently, Mark, and the reason we say it's Mark, is that it's in the Gospel of Mark, and he doesn't identify who it is. He doesn't say that it was I or something. Doesn't identify, so almost everybody thinks that it would be Mark because he was a young man. And so he took off. They grabbed his tunic, of course, and tore it off of him, and he was naked, and he fled. So there was quite an uproar out there in that situation that night then, as you get there. All right, now then, with this kind of behind us here, I'm going to start in chapter 18 and in verse 1, and let's go kind of rapidly. Now when Jesus spoke these words, then he went across that Kidron there, and he went up into the Garden of Gethsemane here. So he was up there, and then it tells about Judas coming. Judas came. He had here the cohorts, and this is when he walks up, and Jesus said, "Whom do you seek?" And he says, "I am he." Now you see, John has already left out a lot of the material that I've kind of filled in there with you from getting it from the other Gospels. But now, here it is that he does this. And down in verse 8, Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he," and so forth. And he said, "Let these others go," so that it would be fulfilled that he hadn't lost a one of them. Now then, in verse 10, that's when Simon took that sword, struck it down, cut off his right ear. And the guy's name was Malchus. Now, then Jesus in verse 11 tells him to put up the sword. And then Jesus says this. He had been praying, "If there's any way this cup can pass from me." But now then he said, "Put up the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father hath given me, shall I not drink it?" In other words, this experience, this crucifixion, this death that the Father has placed upon me, I will have to drink this cup. I will have to go through it. All right. Then in verse 12, so the band, that is the cohorts, the soldiers there, the chief captains, they took him and they brought him in to Annas first. Now, Annas and Caiaphas, you see, Caiaphas is going to be named then right after this. The first guy that they brought him to was Annas, and then they took him over to Caiaphas. Now, here's what we will see here in this next chart. There's going to be 3 Jewish trials. Number 1 is going to be before Annas. Number 2 is going to be before Caiaphas and this mob. When he gets through with Caiaphas, then he's going to be taken down to the Sanhedrin there, in there. But here's what we find. It took him to Annas. Now, the Jews always had one high priest, and Annas was the legitimate high priest. He was the Jewish high priest. But the Romans were mad at Annas for some reason, and they deposed him, took him out of that office, and put his son-in-law, Caiaphas, into that particular position. By the way, about, what is it now, 8, 9, 10 years ago, they found the casket, that ossuary, that box, you know, that has Caiaphas's bones in it, by the way, and has his name on there and so forth, and so they've identified that and recovered that. But now, he took him to Annas, and Jesus wouldn't deal with Annas. He sent him over to Caiaphas, and this then is where Caiaphas, he pulls in the false prophets or false witnesses, and finally one of them said, "Well, we heard him say he would destroy this temple and then raise it in 3 days." Now, did Jesus ever say he would destroy the temple? No, he said, if you destroy the temple, said, you destroy this temple, and I'll raise it in 3 days. In other words, you kill me, and I will raise again. He didn't say that he was going to destroy the temple, but they said he's going to destroy this temple. Well, to them, that was blasphemy. Then they asked him some more questions, and then he said, well, you're going to see me sitting on the right hand of God. So you can mark this down, Caiaphas. The day's coming when you will see me sitting on God's right hand. Now, what is Caiaphas, if he hadn't already seen it, what's he going to see on the judgment day? He's going to see Jesus sitting right there. Now, this is the time that they took him then, and they blindfolded him, and they struck him, slapped him, they reviled him, and they spit in his face. Now, they're doing all of these things to try to get Jesus, well, show him how much really they hate him then in here in doing this. Now, it's at this time that Peter gives his denials. Now, as you start out in verse 15, and you go on down through, here's what you find out about Peter's denials. Again, I said, I'm just going through now real rapidly here. How many times is Peter going to deny him? 3 times. See, 3 times. Before the rooster crows, how many times? Twice. See. Now, he goes in and comes up here to the gate, and so before they let him in the gate, John went out and let him in the gate, and then the girl there that was in charge of that, she said, "Aren't you one of his?" And he said, "No." And so he goes on in. They had a fire built out there because now by this time it's in the early wee hours of the morning, and the time of the year is this time of the year. And so it would be cold over there. And so they had this fire built. He goes over and he's standing around the fire, and then somebody else comes up and says, don't I recognize you there? No. One guy said, "Aren't you the guy?" And he recognized him because he had cut off Malchus's ear. No. And so on 3 different occasions, Peter denied him, and on each occasion he would deny him more than one time. That they'd be sitting there and saying, no, didn't you do that? No, what, I thought you, no. So that's over. Then they came back, and then they denied, they came up, this girl came up, and they recognized him and said, we recognize you, and by your accent and so forth, and you're one of them. And he began to swear and curse. Now, by swearing, that's taking an oath. Swearing and cursing was not like we think about it today. If I told you I saw a guy today and he was swearing and cursing, swearing and cursing is used interchangeably today, aren't they? Like this. And so what that means is, no, I swear by the temple, I don't know him. I swear by, I don't know him. So he's swearing by something. And this was common among the Jews. I swear I don't know the man. And then they came back and said, well, we know you do because your accent denies you. And then he started cursing. Now the cursing there has the idea of condemning something. If I curse Oliver, I'm condemning him. Oliver, you will burn for this. Oliver, you will. And so I start cursing, bringing condemnations upon Oliver's head then. So Peter is really denying all of this then at this time. Now, it's at this time when he was cursing him, though, that Jesus looked over at him, and they got eye contact. Peter and Jesus saw each other, and then what happened? Now, the cock had crowed before the other denial. But all of a sudden, when Peter denied him the 3rd time, what happened? What's the next thing? That cock crew again. And Peter understood, before the cock crows twice, I will have denied him 3 times. Now, Peter then went out and he wept bitterly. Well, at this time, Caiaphas now takes him to the Sanhedrin. So now we're moving down now, probably into the daylight hours, about 6 o'clock, when the Sanhedrin would start to come together. And so he brings him before the Sanhedrin, or the council then, that's down there. At this time, they asked Jesus, "Are you the Son of God?" When they were asking, and his sometimes he would answer, sometimes he wouldn't. But when he would say, "You said it," that means, "Yeah, I am." Now they accused him of blasphemy because he claimed to be the Son of God. So they said, now you're guilty of blasphemy, and according to Jewish law, what do you do to a blasphemer? You kill them. So now they have reason to kill Jesus. They're going to kill him. So they took him to Pilate then to have him killed. Now, there's your 3 Jewish trials that you have, that you find out here about it down here in, all the way through down to verse 28 then. Now, verse 28 is really where we stopped this last week. We start out now with our Roman trials. Now, in the Roman trials, he comes before Pilate. They bring him in, and they said it was early, and they stayed outside because they didn't want to become defiled for the Sabbath day. I said as far as we actually got through this whole chapter right in here. So they stayed outside. So Pilate had to come out and talk to them then. And so Pilate said, "What is this man guilty of?" And their charge was, if he wasn't an evildoer, we wouldn't have brought him. That was really what they said to him here. And then Pilate, in verse 31, saith therefore unto them, "Take him yourself and judge him according to your law." So Pilate knew what was going on. He knew that it was they were playing with their law, and it was a Jewish thing. The Jews therefore said unto him, "It's not lawful to put any man to death, for us to put any man to death, that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spake, signifying what manner of death he should die." Now, the Scriptures is pointing out to us the fulfillment of Jesus' words are coming to pass. When Pilate then comes back and says, "You take him and kill him." Now, if a Jew killed another Jew, how would they do it? What was the method? Stoning. But now then, they said, it's not lawful for us to put any man to death, and you've got to do it. Now, when the Romans do it, what are they going to do? It's going to be crucifying. And what had Jesus prophesied? Had Jesus said, if the Son of Man be stoned, or did he say, if the Son of Man be lifted up, then he shall draw all men unto himself? See, Jesus had prophesied what kind of death he was going to die. All right, in 33, Pilate therefore entered again into the praetorium and called Jesus. So now he's going to have a private conversation with him. He said, "Art thou the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered and said, "Well, are you saying this of yourself? Have you determined this, or did others tell you?" And Pilate, of course, being upset, says, "Am I a Jew? Thine own nation and the chief priest delivered thee unto me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not of this world." So Jesus tells Pilate this. Now, what's going through Pilate's mind when he hears this? When Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world," if somebody were telling you that they were a king, but they were a king not of this world, what would be your feelings toward them? What have we got here? So 37, Pilate therefore said unto him, "Well, art thou a king then?" And Jesus said, "Thou sayest that I am a king." In other words, yes, I'm a king. When he said, when Jesus answers these, "Thou sayest that," it's the same as if I were to tell somebody, and Oliver here said, "Lowell, you think you can whip me, don't you?" And I said, "You said it, buddy." Well, what do I mean? See, it's very clear of what I would mean. So Jesus here then is saying this. He said, "Now to this end have I been born, and unto this end am I come into the world." That's the very purpose I came for, was to be a king. Now he said, "Every one that is of the truth heareth my voice." And Pilate saith unto him, "What is truth?" Now, when Pilate says this, as you read it in the text, it could mean one of two things. It could mean that Pilate is actually asking him a question. What is truth? But when you put it in the context, I don't think that's what he's talking about. Pilate here is in a predicament. Pilate here has the Jews bringing him up, and now then they want him killed, and there's no reason to kill him. Pilate has to have some reason for death, and the only thing that he has is that he's offended these Jews. These Jews are upset at him in here, and so he doesn't have any reason. And so he asked Jesus, are you a king, like they say? And Jesus said, "Yes, I am." Then he gave him a little instruction. And he said, "That's the reason I was born. That's the reason I came into this world," implying that he was somewhere else before he came into this world. See, implying that he had a reason to leave some other place and come into this world. And Pilate, hearing this, and then Jesus asked one other thing. And he says, "Now, I came in to testify about the truth, and anybody who is of the truth hears my voice." Well, at this time, Pilate is frustrated. What is truth? And then what does Pilate do? he gets up and leaves. Is the way that it's stated here. Now, in verse 39, he said, "But you have a custom that I should release unto you one at the Passover. Will you therefore that I release unto you the King of the Jews? They cried out therefore again, saying, Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. All right, here is an interesting thing. Now, here's what is going to happen between verses 38 and 39. Now, I went ahead and read you 39 about Barabbas. But when you put the other Gospels together, here's what Pilate did. Right after he said, "What is truth?" Then he was talking, and he found out that Jesus was from Galilee, and he knew that Herod was in town at that time, and Herod was the king of the Galilean country. So Pilate's trying to get rid of Jesus, so he sends him over to Herod, and sends him over there and said, "Herod, here's one, I'll give you the opportunity, to examine him." Now, it tells us Herod was very happy because he wanted to see Jesus do a miracle. But while he was over there, Jesus wouldn't even answer any of his questions. Herod asked him this and that, he wouldn't ask him any questions. They mistreated him and so forth. They put a robe on him, a royal robe, probably went out and got some old robe that Herod had thrown away or something, and put it on him, and a crown of thorns, and sent it back to Pilate. And so, "I'm sending back your king. You send him over to see if he's king. I'm sending back your king. Here's what I'm doing." It's a joke. It's making fun. So here he is. And then he sent back and said, "I find no cause of death in this man." So here he is. "No, I can't find any cause of death in him whatsoever." So now Pilate has him again. Now when Pilate gets him back, then Pilate is trying to keep from putting him to death. Not because he's in love with Jesus, but because he has to have a legitimate reason for putting him to death. And so he thinks he might get out of it. So he knows that they have this custom. Every Passover, the Jews get some kind of a prisoner, whoever they want, and Pilate will release him. Will release him. We see it in countries today in the Mideast. We see it over there between the Palestinians and the Israelis today. When the Israelis want to show a peaceful overture to the Palestinians, what do? Right? We will release 5 prisoners or something. And it's a big deal. It makes the news. Well, here, we're going to release them. So, do you want me to release Jesus or Barabbas? Well, Pilate obviously thought, since he picked out Barabbas was the others tell us that he was a man of violence. He was a man that caused uproars and tumults in town, and he was a murderer and a robber. Why, surely anybody would say, well, if it's between these two, release Jesus, see, if you had any morality about you whatsoever. But of course, they didn't. And so they cried out, "No, release unto us Barabbas then." So now, in verse 19, or chapter 19 then, he comes back here again, and, oh, by the way, I want to get this in here. In verse 39, this is at the point of where he's dealing with Barabbas, and Pilate's wife sent him a message. And the message was, don't have anything to do with this righteous man, because I have suffered much tonight concerning him. So obviously she's sending, and she said, I've had a dream. And leave this righteous man alone. Now, you've got to put all of this in context here with Pilate one time. Pilate has been called out. They want this man killed. There's no reason for it. The Jews just want him killed. He sends him over to Herod. Herod sends him back. There's no reason to be killed. He's talked with Jesus, and he's asked him about being a king. And what is it that Jesus has told him? Yes, I am a king. In essence, I came into this world. I came from someplace else. I came into this world to be a king. Yes, I am a king, and I speak truth. And so here's Pilate. Now, would he be a staunch believer in any particular god, or would he be a man that believed in many gods, in all this Roman mythology? See, and so here it is. He's thinking, could this be something? And then his wife sends this message to him. Now, the Roman leaders, the Caesars, they put a great deal of stock in dreams, any kind of a dream, and they felt that it was one of their gods up there sending them a message. So now here it is, right in the middle of this hot situation. Pilate gets this message: don't have anything to do with this righteous man. So now it's time now for him to try to release Jesus in here, and he's dealing with him. So let's start out now in verse 19. Then Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers platted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and arrayed him in purple garments. And they came unto him and said, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him with their hands. Now, Pilate takes him to be scourged. Now, it was Roman law that if you're going to crucify somebody, you scourge them first. And that is that you beat them. You beat them with this stick with these long leather thongs on it, and in these thongs tied nails and potsherds and various things that cut the back. But they would take them in and they would scourge them. So Pilate is saying, start the process, take him in and scourge him. So they took him in and they beat him. Now, when they beat Jesus, to you and me, I think, that doesn't sound too bad. I mean, it sounds bad to get a beating, but our idea of a beating is not their idea of a beating. Isaiah had prophesied that he will be beaten so bad you can't recognize him as a man. So he's just going to be mutilated. And that's what they did to these people. They just mutilated them. And history tells us that a lot of times people would die from the beating before they ever got him out to the cross. So now they've just beat Jesus terribly, just beat him to pieces. And then the soldiers come in to put more embarrassment upon him. They put the royal robe back on him again and put the thorns up on his head again. And then they got down and worshiped. Hail, King of the Jews! They'd worship him. Then they'd get up and they'd strike him. They'd slap him. And they'd say, if you're the Son of God, tell me who it is that hit you. Just tell me my name. And so they were just mutilating him and beating him in there. And then in verse 4, and Pilate went out again and saith unto him, Behold, I bring him out to you, that you may know that I find no crime in him. Jesus therefore came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple garments, and Pilate said unto him, Behold the man. Now, this is an insult. Pilate still doesn't want to kill the man. And Pilate thinks if he can bring him out, and these people see what all Jesus has been through, how he's just been beaten to where he's hardly recognizable. He has a crown of thorns put upon his head, and then they put this mock robe of a king. And so Pilate says, Behold the man. In other words, look at your king. Look what I've done to him. Look how I've just crushed him. Look how there's nothing left. Surely they'll let him go now when they see that he's just been totally beaten down this way. And Pilate said in verse 6, When therefore the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out saying, Crucify him! Crucify him! In other words, this is not enough. We will not stop with you beating him and just bringing him down to where there's nothing left of him. Crucify him! Crucify him! And Pilate said unto them, Take him yourself and crucify him, for I find no crime in him. Now they're yelling at each other. So Pilate is saying, You do it yourself if you ought to crucify him. There's no crime in this man. I haven't found anything that he's done wrong. The Jews therefore answered, We have a law. This is their Jewish law. and by that law he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God. So the Jews now are saying, according to our Jewish law, he should die. What effect will this have on Pilate? What effect would it have on a righteous judge today if somebody went into court and said, I'm a Baptist, and according to Baptist doctrine, here's what you need to do. What would the court do? It'd throw it out. And so this carries no weight with Pilate, except it scares him. Now Pilate's having all these experiences. He's seeing this thing with Jesus. He has talked with Jesus. He's heard this odd thing about being a king. His wife is sent to him, don't have anything to do with the man. And now then the Jews are yelling out, we have a law. He says he's the Son of God. Oop. Can you see Pilate? Could he be? Now Pilate doesn't have any concept of the Christ, the Old Testament Christ, the Messiah, but would he have a concept of somehow the Son of God? It'd be the Son of... How would you like if you thought this was your God and this person is the son of that God? How would you feel? So Pilate is getting shook. That's all I'm saying here, and that's what it says. It said here, when Pilate therefore heard this saying, he was the more afraid. So you see, Pilate is getting scared in this thing. And he entered into the praetorium again, and saith unto Jesus, whence art thou? Where'd you come from? Tell me about this thing. See? Tell me here of what you've got that's in here. And so he talks to him now here again in this realm. And Jesus gave him no answer. Now Pilate therefore said unto him, speakest thou not unto me? Don't you know that I have the power to release thee, and I have the power to crucify you? Aren't you going to talk to me? Don't you know that the whole power is in my hands? Now look at what Jesus said to him. Jesus answered him, thou wouldest have no power against me, except it were given thee from above. Therefore he that delivereth me unto thee, that's Caiaphas, hath greater sin. So Pilate, you wouldn't have any power had it not been given to you by God above. You're in this office because God appointed you, and he permitted you to be here. So the one that delivered me to you, he has a greater sin than you do, even though you're going to be the one that crucifies me. Then, 12, upon this Pilate sought to release him. So Pilate said, I've got to let this man go. I've got to let him go. So Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, if thou release this man, thou art not Caesar's friend. Every one that maketh himself a king speaketh against Caesar. When Pilate therefore heard these words, he brought Jesus out, sat down on the judgment seat at the place called the pavement, in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now, it was a Passover. It was a preparation of the Passover. Let's stop right here. When Pilate heard these words, what were the secret words that scared Pilate to death? What are the secret words that caused Pilate to crucify an innocent man? If you don't do it, you're no friend of Caesar. Pilate knows that what that is telling them. Pilate, if you don't crucify him, we're going to the Caesar, and we're going to tell him that we love him and we respect him, and that we delivered to you a king. We delivered to you a man that claimed to be the king of the Jews, somebody that's revolting against you. And Pilate wouldn't kill him. Pilate knows if that happens, he's lost his job. He's going to be removed. So, politically speaking, when he heard that, it scared him to death. So he went in to the judgment seat then and sat down. Now, it was a preparation of the Passover. That's on a Friday. It was about the 6th hour that did this. Now, this, when John speaks of time, he generally speaks in Roman time. Roman time started at midnight. So this would be at 6 o'clock in the morning. See, give you an idea. So it's about 6 o'clock in the morning now in here, and it was a preparation for the Passover. And he saith unto the Jews, took him out, behold your king. Pilate's taking another jab at him, isn't he? In other words, as he presents him to him, behold your king. See? So he's getting ready to kill him. They therefore cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate saith unto them, shall I crucify your king? Do you see the irony in this? Do you see how they're arguing back and forth? The chief priest answered, we have no king but Caesar. Then therefore he delivered him unto them to be crucified. So the Jews now have played this political contest. They've turned it around. They're making it look like that they are the ones that are really on Caesar's side, and if Pilate lets him go, then Pilate will be against Caesar. So he delivers him now to be crucified. They took Jesus therefore, and he went out bearing the cross for himself unto a place called the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him. And with him 2 others, one on one side of Jesus and one on the other, and he was in the midst. Now, we can go back to the other Gospels, and we find that they put the cross on Jesus' back. He went out, and evidently he couldn't carry it. He staggered under it. And so finally they confiscated another man to carry the cross and made him carry the cross for Jesus. Took him out, nailed him to the cross, and put him up. So here now you have this Jesus up on the cross that is in here in doing this. Here's a picture of a beating, the way that they would portray it, and to give you an idea, that he was just beaten terribly in here. So now Jesus is going out, and he's put up on the cross. So now then we have the story of his crucifixion. They took Jesus out, therefore, and he went out bearing the cross for himself unto this place. And in verse 19, and Pilate wrote a title also and put it on the cross. And there was written, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Now this is Pilate's last little dig that he can get in on the Jews. It was customary to write a note and put on the cross so when people went by to see it, they would know why the guy was being crucified. So he puts up there, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. This title, therefore, read many of the Jews, for the place where Jesus was crucified was nigh unto the city, and it was written in Hebrew and in Latin and in Greek. So it was written in all 3 of the languages here. Hebrew language would be the language of the Hebrews. The Greek would be the language of everybody. It would be the common language that everybody spoke. And Latin would be the Roman language that they had there. And so the chief priest of the Jews therefore said unto Pilate, write not the King of the Jews, but that he said, I am King of the Jews. So it goes to Pilate and says, take that down. Don't put up there King of the Jews, put up there, he said he's King of the Jews. And Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. In other words, it's final. That's it, as far as Pilate is concerned. Now, of course, the big thing about Pilate has happened in here. The other Gospels tell about it. But what did Pilate finally do right before he took him and delivered him to be crucified? What did he do? Went in and washed his hands. And he says, I'm washing my hands. I'm innocent of the blood of this man. And what did the Jews say? Let his blood be upon us and upon our children. We'll accept the blame. We'll accept the consequences. You see, so you learn a lot of other things by these other Gospels that we have there. So now then, here we have then Pilate getting in that last jab at him. The soldiers, therefore, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts, to every soldier a part, and also the coat. Now the coat was without seam, woven from top throughout. And they said therefore one to another, Let us not rend it or tear it, but cast lots for it, whose it might be, that the Scriptures might be fulfilled, which saith, They parted my garments among them, and upon my vesture they did cast lots. So even in this, here it is, there's prophecy being fulfilled. The Roman soldiers would customarily divide up the property of the people that they crucified. So they took Jesus and all of his possessions, and they put them in 4 parts, one for each soldier. But when they came to this tunic, it was an unusual tunic. Normally, tunic was sewn together from top to bottom, but this one was in one piece. Now, we're told, Josephus says, that the tunic of the high priest was in one piece, that he wore a tunic of one piece. It could be that when they saw this, there's an indication of somebody we're dealing with here, as he's claiming to be the Son of God and so forth. But they then, the prophecy was that when they kill Jesus, they'll part his garment, but they're going to gamble for his tunic, his vesture. These things, therefore, the soldiers did, but there were standing by the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. So there were 4 women there. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple standing by whom he loved, he saith unto his mother, Woman, behold thy son. Then saith he to the disciple, Behold thy mother. And from that hour his disciple took her into his own home. History tells us John took Mary into his own home, and she lived with him 11 more years before she died. 28, After this Jesus, knowing that all things are now finished, that the Scripture might be accomplished, saith, I thirst. There was set there a vessel full of vinegar, so that he put a sponge full of the vinegar upon hyssop, and brought it to his mouth. And when Jesus therefore had received the vinegar, he said, It is finished. And he bowed his head and gave up the spirit. Now, Jesus said some other things. While he's on the cross, here's the way it happened when you put them all together, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The first thing was he lifted his head and he said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. And then when the criminal on the other side said, Jesus, remember me when you come in your kingdom. And he looked at him and he said, Today you will be with me in paradise. Then he looked down and saw his mother and John, and that's when he said, Son, behold your mother, and lady, behold thy son. Then he looked up to God, and he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, in this is a horrible thought to think about. If I ask you, had God forsaken him, the answer would have to be yes and no. God is with him all the way. But yes, God had forsaken him. Because it's at this time, Jesus is on the cross, that he is taking the sins of the world with him. He's paying for the sins of the world. And now then, God has to look down upon him as the one who is guilty of all the sins. He's not personally guilty, but he has to treat him as though he's personally guilty. Now, if Denise, let's suppose, had been running all kind of stoplights and she had, $4,000 worth of tickets rolled up, the police come and get her, and they say, okay, they throw her in jail. So taking you to the judge tomorrow, and you're either going to pay these tickets tomorrow or you're going to jail for 5 years. It's just that simple. So in the morning, she's going to go before the judge. Now suppose I go down and I walk up with Denise, and the judge says, okay, Denise Hilden, she walks up. Now she's just as guilty as she can possibly be. And the law is clear, $4,000 of which she doesn't have, or 5 years in prison. And suppose I step forth and I say, Your Honor, I'm here in behalf of Denise, and whatever it is, I'll pay it. I'll pay it. Now let's suppose Steve Grimes is the judge. He looks down and he sees me. What option does Steve have? Could Steve say, well, hi, Lowell. Hey, I really enjoyed that coffee we had a couple days ago. You want to go out to breakfast in the morning? Could he do that? As the judge? No. No, he's got to look at me. Okay, you're going to pay the price, yeah. Okay, here it is. Now then, what have I taken upon my shoulders, and what must the judge tell me? You'll either pay me $4,000 or you're going to jail for 5 years. See? And that's the way Steve would have to treat me. Could Steve look down and say, well, Lowell, I don't want to do this to you. I don't want to do this to you. You're my friend. Could he do that and be a righteous judge? No. No, he's got to separate himself as a righteous judge and hold me guilty. That's the situation with God and His Son. Jesus had taken the sins of the world upon His shoulders. God, the righteous God, was looking down upon Him and could not consider Him as His Son. How that must have hurt God. How it must have hurt God. Instead of thinking about Steve and I, think about a judge whose son came, his own son came and stood there in Denise's behalf. How would a judge feel sentencing his son, see, and saying, you're going to pay for it? That's what God did. And that's where Jesus, He felt this. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Now, Jesus is not asking this as a question. Jesus knows. But it's a rhetorical question. Does anybody, it's like when you go into an operation, you know it's going to be painful, you know it's going to hurt, but when it does hurt, what does it mean when somebody says, oh, why does it hurt so much? Why does it hurt so much? Do they want a scientific lectureship on why it hurts so much, or is that an expression, you see? So this is Jesus' expression here of all of this. So then He says, I thirst. And that's when they gave Him the vinegar. Now all of this is prophesied, you see about it right in here. Now, after He said I thirst, then He says, it is finished. Meaning His job was done. There wasn't anything else left to do that's in here. And then He looked up to His Father in heaven, and He said, Father, into Thy hands I commend my spirit. And He died. Now, you need to look at His crucifixion and break it in two parts. They nailed Him on the cross about 9 o'clock in the morning. And from 9 to noon, He was nailed there. Then at noon, at 12 o'clock, all of a sudden, a great blackness came over the land. And this blackness lasted for 3 hours until 3 o'clock. And Jesus is making these statements. And then when Jesus said, Father, into Thy hands I commend my spirit, there was a great earthquake. A great earthquake when Jesus died. The soldiers were scared to death in doing this. And said in verse 31, the Jews therefore, because of the Passover, that the bodies should not remain on the cross upon the Sabbath, for the day of that Sabbath was a high day, asked Pilate that their legs might be broken, that they might be taken away. So the Jews came, and now the Romans didn't care. They left bodies on these crosses and just let them decay until the vultures and so forth came and ate them. But the Jews had a law that a dead body was a cursed thing, and so this is at Passover time. This is their holy feast, and it's right outside Jerusalem, and they want to get rid of these dead bodies so that there will not be any pollution around. So they came and asked the Romans. They said, would you break their legs so that we can kill them and we'll take them off. Now, if you're up there and you break the leg, if they were evidently standing on some little thing here and tied in here, and you break the leg and then it goes like this, then suffocation is going to take place. And of course the bleeding and all of that's already been happening. And so they went over and they broke the legs of the thieves. But when they came to Jesus, his legs, he was already dead. And it said, the soldiers therefore came and brake the legs of the first and of the other that was crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was dead already, they brake not his legs. Howbeit one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and straightway there came out blood and water. And he that hath seen these things, now this is John. John is saying, now I'm the one that actually saw it. He that hath seen, borne witness, and his witness is true. In other words, I'm telling you what I saw in here. And his witness is true, that ye also may believe. For these things came to pass that the scripture might be fulfilled, a bone of him shall not be broken. And again, another scripture said, they shall look upon him whom they pierced. So the psalm said there would not be a bone broken, and there wasn't. Came awful close, didn't it? See? Came awful close. And then Zechariah said, they're going to look upon him whom they pierced. Now think about this. Hundreds of years before this crucifixion of the Romans was invented, you have the Psalms and Zacharias and so forth back there. And they prophesied that Jesus would be raised up. They prophesied that his garments would be divided, and one piece of his garment would be gambled for. They prophesied that not a bone in his body would be broken, when the bones in the others would be broken. And are there other things that I'm missing in here? All of these things having to do with crucifixion before the Romans was ever a nation to have this crucifixion. So Jesus, here on this cross, has fulfilled all these prophecies that came to pass there. All right, now Jesus is dead. Now next week, we'll start then with the death and the burial and the resurrection. Okay, class dismissed. Any comments?